Hey guys, so the first question that I threw in this week is kind of just a fun one. It doesn't tie into the reading per se, but I was just talking with one of my friends who's doing the read along with us, and I was asking, like, what did you even know about Jane Eyre before you started reading? And of course he says, oh, you know, I knew broad strokes. It is a classic after all. Like, if you haven't read it, you knew about it. So I want to know from all of you, what did you know going in? I know some of you that are participating, this is a reread for you and you've already read it, so you already know a lot more than I do. I really like to approach books and movies and TV shows with as little information as possible. So you might think, that is really weird. How do you know if you're gonna like the book, movie, TV show, whatever? So yes, that's a weird thing of mine, but I like to kind of just be surprised as things happen. So in the case of Jane Eyre, I knew it was a classic. I knew it had a beautiful cover. And I knew the cover was purple. So all of these are things that were things that I liked about it. But I just knew it was British lit. And I knew that people like it, including my best friend told me it's her favorite British lit book. It kind of made her like British lit, which is what spawned this whole read along, because I basically sent her a picture of all of my classics and said, which should I read next? And she said Jane Eyre. But so I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know she was orphaned. I didn't know that it like spanned her whole life, which is what I'm assuming at this point. Still don't know. One of the really cool things about the editions that I collect, the Canterbury Classics, is that they don't have the traditional like back of the book summary. And again, you might think like, oh, that's not a positive, but I definitely think it is. So the back of the book actually is a quote, as well as the front of the book, as you all probably know, has a bunch of quotes. So it really makes it so you're kind of diving in. They probably assume everyone knows what all these books are about because they're classic. But again, have you met me? I don't. Yeah, and as far as how I pick my regular books, I end up reading maybe like the first paragraph of a description or maybe the whole thing, and I'll add a book to my want to read list, and then I completely forget why I added it. Sometimes I'm adding a book because a friend recommended it to me or because I heard good things about it on Instagram, but I don't actively seek out information. And then when I read it, I'm like, oh, hey, I like this, or oh, this kind of reminds me of this other thing I like. I wonder if I had gone down a rabbit hole a year ago and that's what led to this book being on my list. So I'm just kind of curious if any of you are the same way as me, that kind of go into things without a lot of information. And I want to know how much you knew about Jane Eyre going in. But with that being said, don't tell me spoilers, because I only know what happened through chapter 10. All right, well, happy reading, and I'm looking forward to discussing all these questions with you this week. Hey everyone, we are entering our second week of discussions now, so I'm really excited to dive in. The chapters this week were really good in my opinion, so let's get started. Our first prompt is taking place in chapter 6, which is the start of our reading for this week, and we have Jane is, at school, and she's starting to settle in a little bit. And she's kind of observing some certain things that are happening in her class with her classmate that is being referred to as Burns at this time. And she's kind of just thinking that this is sort of a sad situation that this person is going through. And then she's starting to kind of look around and observe what is going on maybe with her classmates as well. And there's a quote that I'm going to read. Probably, if I had lately left a good home and kind parents, this would have been the hour when I should most keenly have regretted the separation. That wind would have sat into my heart. This obscure chaos would have disturbed my peace. And it was, I derived from both a strange excitement and reckless and feverish. I wished the wind to howl more wildly, the gloom to deepen to darkness, and the confusion to rise to clamor. So this is kind of just a reminder to us of where Jane is coming from. So the fact that Jane is an orphan, the fact that she kind of had this not so ideal upbringing, shall we say. So it's just kind of a reminder to us of what exactly she's dealing with at that time. So that's why I chose that particular quote, and also the fact that I just thought the writing was really beautiful there. There's actually so many quotes that I found in the readings this week. I don't know if you can see all of that. We can't talk about all of them, unfortunately, so I have just picked some of my favorites for our discussion for this week. All right, so the next passage that I'm going to read for this week is actually taking place at a time that Jane has now really started to have conversations with a character that I previously mentioned, who was originally just referred to as Burns for last name, but now we know that this character's name is Helen. So Jane is kind of talking to her and is trying to figure out how she can endure some of the I don't want to say torment necessarily, but that is kind of the closest word I can think of that she's enduring from the teachers. Jane is kind of in awe of Helen. So Helen has utmost knowledge in all things, it looks like, to Jane. So she's really in awe of her intelligence, and despite this, she seems to get picked on by some of the teachers because she's a little bit disorderly, maybe. She doesn't keep her drawers that clean and that sort of thing. So at this one moment, Helen is talking to Jane, and she says, it is weak and silly to say you cannot bear what it is your fate to be required to bear. So I just found that to be a really strong passage, because Jane keeps thinking, I can't bear what you're going through. I can't go through what you're going through. And in reality, as Helen is kind of pointing out to us here, we're kind of all dealt the hand that we're dealt. We have to endure some things that we maybe wouldn't even think that we would be able to, but when it comes down to it, it's what we need to bear. So I found that to be a really interesting passage, and it actually, that idea of what Jane is able to endure comes up in our other reading from this week as well. Alrighty, so this next passage is actually part of that same conversation that Jane had with Helen. So you can tell that I was a big fan of it because I have wanted to discuss it a bit. But so Helen says to Jane, would you not be happier if you tried to forget her severity together with the passionate emotions it excited? So I just thought this was kind of just a good lesson in life. The fact of the matter is that we have these people in our lives that treat us poorly, and we can either spend our energy thinking about how terrible they are and wishing they weren't that way, or we can kind of just try to be happy despite them. And I sort of think this is what Helen is driving at here. So basically saying to Jane, where are you going to spend your energy? Are you going to let this be something that just festers inside of you? In general, I feel like we kind of meet people at a time in our lives that we need to, whether they need to meet us or we need to meet them. We need to help each other in some way, grow together, that sort of thing. So I kind of feel like this is a person that was really significant for Jane to meet at this point, because it's really helping her grow as a person, and just is a really significant relationship in her development. So let me know what your thoughts are too. All right, a bit later on in our reading, this next bit happens, and it's just wild, so let's talk. Mr. Brocklehurst has come to the school, and as you might recall, he's actually the person who had spoken to Jane's aunt and gotten her kind of the connection to get into the school. So he shows up, and Jane kind of freaks out because she's like, he's not a really nice person. He's friendly or associated with my aunt. I don't really like that he's here. The school has kind of become a safe haven for her at this point. So he starts out and he's kind of just being terrible, and he ends up seeing someone with curly hair, and he flips out, says that you know, hair shouldn't be that way, we should cut it off, like we're supposed to just be creatures of God at this point, we shouldn't be having this curly hair to distract us. So everyone's kind of on edge already because he's being a bit erratic here. And so then Jane is just really freaked out and she's really nervous, and she's holding this slab that she's kind of doing her work on, and she ends up dropping it because she's so freaked out and so nervous. So it slips out of her hands, it falls to the ground, and it cracks. So now all eyes on Jane. So he starts to kind of educate the room on what type of person Jane is. He starts to kind of share stories that her aunt had shared with him, which, as we know, the aunt, not a great person either, so her stories kind of have to be taken with a grain of salt. But so he says to the room, "You must be on your guard against her. You must shun her example. If necessary, avoid her company, exclude her from your sports, shut her out of your converse. Teachers, you must watch her. Keep your eyes on her movements, weigh well her words, scrutinize her actions, punish her body to save her soul, if indeed such salvation is possible." Oh my goodness. So this man is essentially on this vendetta against Jane at this point, but the thought of this man who kind of is the benefactor of the school showing up and basically saying to the class of teachers and students, "Hey, this girl over here, the new one, yeah, you all need to be really mean to her. She's not worth your time. Basically, like, you should be in trouble if you're caught being nice to her or hanging around her." And it's just like, what type of person does that? Like, she's a child, she's very young at this point, and so for him to say that, I thought this whole portion was bananas, but it also kind of showed what type of person he was. Also, kind of a funny thing that happens is he goes on his rampage about the curly hair, he goes on the rampage against Jane, and then his female family members kind of stroll in. They're dressed to the nines, they have their fur on, their hair all done up, all this stuff. So all these things that he said were basically things that would make you a bad Christian, if you would be vain and the girl shouldn't be raised in this way. And not to mention, it's not like the girl curled her hair, she just has curly hair naturally. Like, I'm sure it wasn't styled in any fancy way. So, but yeah, these women show up that came with him and they're dressed to the nines. So the girls are like, hypocrite much? So, and also in this, he kind of goes on a bit more with stories of the aunt, and Jane's sitting there like, he's telling lies about me, but I'm a child and I don't really know what I can even do about it. So that was a pivotal moment in my mind, but I would love to hear what you think about it as well. All right, so the next passage that I want to discuss with you has a few things that have happened in between that I'm just going to kind of broadly mention here. So after that moment where Jane was embarrassed in front of the class, she's really sad about that, Helen comes to her rescue, and it's just like, no one is going to think badly of you. If anything, people just kind of think he was a jerk. Everyone's going to forget about this rather quickly, not to worry. And Jane's kind of like, my life is over, that was mortifying. And Helen's like, no, I'm here, I got you, you're good. So it was this really sweet moment. But as she is consoling her, the head teacher ends up pulling them both into her apartment, giving them like dessert and tea, and just kind of like restoring their cups, okay? And it's a really special moment. So I kind of wanted to mention it as well, even though it didn't make it into one of the prompts. But it was a really sweet thing, and I love that like the two girls were brought together. During that, the teacher ends up asking Jane, what's the truth here? Like, he said a lot of things about you, is it true? And Jane was like, well, no. And so she ended up getting to tell her side of the story. So that was a good moment that like an adult in Jane's life was like, I don't immediately think the worst of you. Let me hear from you what actually happened, and let's discuss this. So that's probably one of my favorite scenes so far. Like if I was picturing everything that's happened so far, that was really a special moment. Okay, so let's talk about the next one. The next one is another passage, and in this case, Helen has gotten in trouble. Her drawer is a mess. Her drawer is actually a mess because she was going to clean it that night, but Jane had gotten in trouble. They had gone to the apartment, so she never had time. By the time they got back to their room, it was too late. She wouldn't have been able to see her drawer and tidy things up. So she gets in trouble in the morning because her drawer is a mess. And so she ends up having to like wear this thing on her saying that she's the worst and all this stuff, and it's meant to just kind of torment and embarrass her for the day, to have her learn her lesson. So Jane is not loving this, as you can imagine. So let's see what happens. She said, so they get to the end of the day, and she wasn't able to kind of do anything about it all day. At the end of the day, she said, or it says, I ran to Helen, tore it off, and thrust it into the fire. The fury of which she was incapable had been burning in my soul all day, and tears, hot and large, had continually been scalding my cheeks. For the spectacle of her sad resignation gave me an intolerable pain at the heart. Okay, so I loved that moment. Well, I didn't love that it happened, but I loved that moment because this is showing the fact that Jane is really feeling this pain of this other person almost even more deeply than Helen is. Like she loves her dear friend so much, and this friend has just kind of made her life so much better, has protected her during this really trying time in Jane's life when, you know, the benefactor had been a complete jerk and told everyone not to be friends with her. So she had come to Jane's rescue, and now Jane was kind of all day like, when can I come to Helen's rescue? I need to be this person for her. I need to help protect her too. And I just thought that was so sweet that this was how she felt, and that she just, you know, wanted to do something. And even in this case where Helen, the entire time Helen was just kind of like, yeah, you know, these things happen. I should be better. It's okay. It is what it is. Like, she's just had such good spirits about it the whole time. Jane's like, no, this isn't okay. Like, I'm upset on your behalf. If you're not going to be upset, I'm going to just be upset on your behalf. And that's friendship, right? And that's beautiful. So that's why I wanted us to talk about that one this week. But let me know what your thoughts were as well. Okay, so since our last passage, what has happened is everyone has gotten sick, basically, at the boarding school. Anyone that has family and another place that they can go has pretty much left. People are dying. They're having to bury people. Not a great time. Also not really what I wanted to be reading about right now during a COVID pandemic. But at any rate, so this is what's going on. Helen is sick. Helen is not sick with the same thing as everyone else. So she's being kept separate from everyone else so that she doesn't get what they have, but she is coughing, she's very sick. And now Jane finally discovers that she's actually on her deathbed. She's going to pass. So Jane is talking to Helen. She actually sneaks in to where they're being kept, where Helen is being kept. She's being kept privately from everyone. And so Jane waits for everyone to be asleep, and then she sneaks in so that she can be with her. Okay, so Helen says, I am very happy, Jane, and when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve. There is nothing to grieve about. We all must die one day, and the illness which is removing me is not painful. It is gentle and gradual. My mind is at rest. I leave no one to regret me much. I have only a father, and he is lately married and will not miss me. By dying young, I shall escape great suffering. I had not qualities or talents to make my way very well in the world. I should have been continually at fault. Okay, so this is really, I mean, Jane's an orphan, so she's obviously lost her parents, but she was very young. So Helen is like her person, right? This person that she loves, and they are best friends, and they're very young, and so to have to deal with a loss of that magnitude, and so Jane's thinking like, I'm not going to recover from this. This is traumatic. This is really sad. And then Helen, literally on her deathbed, it's just like, no, you need to know that this is the best thing, this is okay. Helen ends up going on to say some things about her religious beliefs and how, you know, she's going to be reunited with God and she's happy about that. So she kind of is explaining to Jane where she's coming from and why she's at ease. But that passage was a really powerful moment. After that, they end up kind of cuddling up to each other, and they say goodnight and they're holding each other, and Helen ends up passing away in the night. So it's a very sad moment. They end up taking Jane out of the bed, putting her back in her own bed before telling her the news. Like, I think it would have been very shocking for anyone waking up and realizing that the person next to you is no longer with you. So that's what ended up happening there. This is near the end of our reading for this week, and it made me really sad. I'm sad talking about it right now as well. But let me know what you thought during that whole last scene before Helen passes. All right, so the final chapter of the week actually had a really different tone to it than the previous chapters this week. So a bunch of time has passed, and we now have seen that Jane has gone through her whole time as a student. She's also gone through time as a teacher at the same school. So she's been at the school now for years. She's kind of settled into a rhythm, and she likes her life. What she ends up actually saying, and I'm going to flip ahead, I tired of the routine of 8 years in one afternoon. So all of a sudden, this thought just occurs to her, like, I want more out of life than to be just kind of staying in the same property, these same walls all day. So she ends up getting this great idea. She's going to put an ad in the paper. She's going to say what subject matter she can teach, basically to be kind of like a live-in nanny tutor type of person for a family. So she has this idea. She sends the money for the ad, she puts it in, she ends up hearing back by someone who is interested. They write back and forth a little bit, and she decides she's going to take the job. So now she's starting to prepare for this next phase. And she has a quote here, which I think is just so amazing. So it says, "A phase of my life was closing tonight, a new one opening tomorrow. Impossible to slumber in the interval. I must watch fervorously while the change was being accomplished." Okay, who else has felt like this before, right? Like your night before a new job or new school or anything major like that. It's like there's so much anticipation. You don't really know what to expect. You're going to be meeting all kinds of new people, and this is a new chapter. If you've done a major move in your life, moved to another part of the world, a country, whatever, I just felt like, wow, Charlotte Bronte, you really hit the nail on the head with that one. Like, that was just so well written as far as how I think we've all felt when we're in that same situation. So I really loved that. The chapter kind of ends up having this sweet note to it because it's, again, her last night. She's packed everything up. Her stuff is already shipped. And then she has a visitor. So she has Bessie come to see her, and she's kind of catching her up on her life. And she has 2 children. She has a daughter that she's named Jane. She's doing really well, and she's really happy. And she's kind of updating Jane on how her family is doing and all this stuff. But she basically said to Jane, I heard you were leaving, that you were heading to another part of the country, and I figured I needed to come see you before you left. And it just was such a surprise to Jane, and it was such a sweet moment. So they're kind of just sitting and catching up like old friends, and really as like peers at this point, whereas the last time they saw each other, Jane was just a girl and needing to be really cared for by this person. So I really loved that moment. We do learn something during this conversation too, which I'm hoping it comes up again later, not sure if it will, but we learn that Jane's Eyre side of the family, who previously we heard that they were you know, very poor and not able to care for her, all that jazz. We hear that someone from that side of the family actually went to the estate to visit the family soon after Jane went to school, and they wanted to see Jane. And they were very disappointed that she wasn't there. And we're hearing, oh, he was a wine merchant or worked for a wine merchant and he's in Madeira now, all this stuff. But very interesting. So before we were told like they didn't really have the means to care for someone, suddenly now they're like on a ship heading to Madeira. Like, okay, that's a little bit different. And I want to see how that's going to tie in. So Jane's now leaving that part of the country where her family's from to head elsewhere. Curious if her paths are going to cross with any of the Eyre family, or anyone else in her family for that matter too. So more to come on that, I think. I'm hoping. I don't know why we would have been told this information if it's never going to come back to something. So let's see. We'll find out more as we continue on reading this next week. So far we have read the first 10 chapters, and we'll be reading through chapter 15 this week. I hope you'll join me and let me know what your thoughts are.